How's it going?
Hey Kelly, how you doing?
Good. Welcome to your first podcast guest here on Navigating the Grid. Excited to have you.
I'm pumped. I'm a fan. I listen to it. That's great.
That's awesome. Well, if you guys don't know Keith, I don't know how you don't, but Keith is the CEO of Operant Networks. He is really active in our renewable space related to cybersecurity. He is on, I would say, the speaking circuit and active on LinkedIn, and he's got a really great voice and a great perspective about where we're headed with our industry and really how we need to be doing the right thing when it comes to cybersecurity. So, Keith, I'm really pumped to have you, and I'm excited for you to tell us kind of how you landed at Operate and how you got there, because it's a pretty cool story. I just really appreciate your background, and I don't know if you always tell people your story. So, yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Well, thanks again for inviting me. But yeah, so the short version of it is I was lucky enough to join a solar technology company. So I'd started in the solar industry back in 2008. And then a couple years into that, I was lucky enough to join this team of folks at a company called Solmetric, which was widely known and respected and used around the world. And we were able to build that company and eventually sell that company to one of the large solar players. And then Randy, who is our CTO and founder, kind of left after a little while and started to think, he's a master inventor of technology and visionary type guy. And he was thinking very much about what is next. And he landed on really communications and security, really just the trend of decentralizing the electric grid and maybe turning off a big central power plant, replacing it with a lot of little small things. All of those things have, being connected to the internet becomes somewhat terrifying from a security perspective. So that was really the origin story of where we started working on Operant and this problem.
Yeah, I love that. I think that people that do the most impactful work for reliability typically spend some time in solar development, and we're terrified at some point.
Yeah. There was a few key people when we started having the conversations, including the Department of Energy, that were like, thank God you're asking this question because we are very, very concerned. So that was kind of some early confirmation that we should, start working on the problem.
Yeah, definitely. How do you see, I mean, I think for folks that aren't cybersecurity, working in that space all the time, but are working in the renewable space, that intersection of cybersecurity and renewables, like from your perspective, walk us through the importance there.
Yeah, I think generally, historically, most people are just been busy, building projects or, selling modules, equipment, stuff, OEMs. But I do think the entire industry is acknowledging that, we've come to a point of maturation where we are now not just, putting solar on a rooftop, where we are actually building enough of this stuff and putting it on the grid, where in aggregate, it's becoming critical infrastructure or could be considered that. And I think a lot of people in our industry recognize that, but they're not entirely sure what they should do because they don't have that deep, security background.
Yeah. What kind of risks are you seeing right now in your space?
I mean, there's a lot happening in the world of cyber and infrastructure. I mean, historically, also the other trend that's kind of new is that there wasn't really a incentive for, the adversary, the cyber hackers, to come into critical infrastructure or the world of like industrial machines. There wasn't really a monetary reason or reason. But what's going on now in the geopolitical world from adversary nation states, as we call them, or even from like the black market of criminals, there are now incentives to actually start targeting the world of industrial and critical infrastructure. So that is also new. And there are, we see in the news, maybe like school districts or municipalities or hospitals getting hit with cyber attacks for what's called ransomware. And this is starting to happen in our sector as well.
Yeah, we've seen a few ransomware attacks over the past year, and we've definitely seen even on in our intrusion detection side of the house, seeing things coming from all over the world, right? And I think you're seeing that volume constantly across all of your customers.
Yeah. This is definitely becoming a new focus for everyone. And again, our industry, because the industry is relatively new compared to say like electric utilities or some of this legacy stuff, we're all learning together to how to continue to grow very rapidly, but also now starting to understand that we have some responsibility from a security perspective.
It's interesting too. I always wonder, I'd be curious what you think, but I feel like we kind of have a bigger target sometimes too, where, these sites are built by people with more of a financial focus, and then we have assets deployed like trackers that have wireless systems, things like that. And then these sites are being operated by a third party O&M that's, halfway across the country, remoting in. We have inverter techs that are plugging laptops in to change settings. I mean, I feel like the threat landscape is quite large. What do you think?
Yeah, the complexity, yeah, you're spot on. I mean, the complexity, the way the things used to work and the way it used to work, which is like you have a power plant and you have a dedicated like fiber connection, and you have one entity that's only allowed to communicate on that line. So, you're just building this big cyber wall around that one thing. And if anyone else happens to be on that network, that's the alarm, that's the problem. In our world, what you're saying is like you have, in one single facility, you might have, 5 or 6 different stakeholders that are all coming and going remotely, accessing equipment in the field, pulling data to different public cloud infrastructure using things like, wireless cellular connections. And all of that makes this world extremely complicated. So I agree with you. So we have this issue where the complexity of these systems are growing exponentially just at the right time, that also we're becoming a focus of a target, which makes the world pretty interesting from where we both sit.
It does. One of the things I really appreciate about you is you make the how to fix it or how to make it better easy to understand. So walk us through, for kind of the novice here that's listening, our audience is kind of a widespread, not all cybersecurity people. So walk us through, like, how do you start mitigating this risk? Because it's a huge risk and it's a little overwhelming.
Yeah, I'd say I think it's still very much about the basics. So there are basic, traditional hygiene stuff from a cybersecurity perspective, like having passwords. Everyone has a different password. That's sometimes not the case, especially like on a site. Like we've been to sites where the password to the main computer that accesses everything is just like on a sticky pad and it's just posted on the wall. But yeah, having a good password program, implementing things like two-factor authentication. These are like the basics. When you move up a level, maybe from that level to like the next thing that we're talking about having people remote in and out to sites, and connecting a lot of things to the internet. I mean, this is technology areas that Operant focuses on. And the way I do explain it to people, that hopefully it makes sense, is very much, when you have a site and a facility, someone has to control the gates of all these people coming and going. So that's kind of one capability, which is in the category of called secure remote access. And then the other one is just really securing the data as it's flying around from site to cloud and from person to person and system to system. And the traditional way of doing those things, and the way you would do it, say for like on your cell phone, is like a VPN kind of connection. That is kind of a fine for a consumer, or if you just have one of these connections. But there are better ways, like next generation VPNs, or dare I say the word zero trust, because that's a super buzzword and doesn't really mean much to anyone anymore. But there are better methodologies to how do you secure all this data in transport, while at the same time not making it overly burdensome to keep all of it stable.
Yeah, that's a lot. And there's a lot of layers to it too. Yes, across the board. Yeah. What do you think? How do you think with the regulatory landscape that's changing? Like, where do you think we're headed on a regulatory perspective?
Yeah, I think, and you're obviously much more fluent in this than I am. I think I know obviously we have NERC-CIP, and the threshold of where NERC-CIP starts, which has historically been 75 megawatts and up in our world. There are things happening, and I think the general consensus is people acknowledge that that threshold will probably be lowered. And again, there are tools and ways to do things. It's just, can you do things that fall within a budget of these smaller facilities? So everyone is talking about 20 megawatts and up potentially having to fall under the NERC-CIP regulations. And then it's really, how do you do enough from a security perspective and a compliance perspective, but then also you're working within operating within a reasonable budget. So that's kind of the one area from a compliance perspective that everyone is talking about. And then the other ones are just the kind of just general slow evolution of the standards. The regulatory bodies also understand that we are now building critical infrastructure, and this is a key industry, and that though they're just setting the baseline, that baseline needs to slowly get better over time.
So really interesting. Last night, it was official. The SAR was signed or approved by FERC. So the 20 megawatts, excuse me, the 20 megawatts connected at 60 kV or higher is actually official now.
Wow.
So one of the things, I'm putting you on the spot here. This wasn't in our list of questions we talked about, but can people make a 20 megawatt site that doesn't have a lot of budget? Can you make that secure?
Yeah.
I feel like that is a key question that we have to solve over the next 12 months with that change.
Yeah. Yeah. And so luckily, I mean, that's not a surprise question because I get that question all the time. Luckily, again, we have a very, obviously, Operant being a technology vendor and have been looking at this. I mean, we strongly say yes, that we can do it. The only reason I know that is because when we started the company, our last company was bought by Vivint, or at the time Vivint Solar, which was a residential solar company. And we had residential price points in mind when we built our tech about, how do we operate, how do you securely transport data information on really, really small, like IoT-like devices, like little small things like sensors and devices out there. And so there are ways of doing it. You probably need kind of next generation technology like we have. The way most companies have done this stuff historically, like the utility version, probably will not, we call those kind of like big iron solutions. They probably can't shrink down into that very small footprint and the right price point, but there are ways of doing this. So I'd say generally, yes, there are ways that not only are the products themselves cost effective, but oftentimes it's not really about the product. It's really about the labor that's required to make that product functional like over time, because a lot of the traditional like IT and networking and cyber tools, they require a lot of ongoing management and maintenance to kind of keep them reliable and updated. So it's really both of those two capabilities. One is, okay, we need a product at the right price point, but then what does it take to make this product do what it's supposed to do over 5 or 10 years? That's the second piece of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's really where it's at. I was at a large solar site a couple weeks ago, and it was built by a utility with their rack and their SCADA spec. And I mean, that thing's a spaceship.
Yeah.
And that thing cost, a lot of money. I don't even know where to start to even think through the dollars. But that's not going to apply. That's not going to support the industry going forward when we get to these 20 megawatts.
The example that we always use is like, look, if you have like a 30-person team for like cyber and OT and networking, and you have the budget and you have like one huge power plant and you have a dedicated like fiber connection, like, sure, there's plenty of tools out there and you'll be fine. But the thing we always think about is like, if you have like an EV charger in a parking lot and a very, very small budget for that one EV charger, it's like the traditional tools will probably not work in that use case. Yeah,
definitely. Well, it's so fascinating to me. And I love watching what Operant is up to and what you guys are up to. Because I think we have to have a solution that's not this big clunky utility solution. That's not the world that's not what this grid transformation that we're going through. That's not what the world's going to look like in 10 years. And so I think it's so exciting to watch what you guys have going on.
Cool. Thanks. And there are a lot of also like really new things coming out of like the federal government and the national labs. Like there's these concepts of secure by design, and INL is doing a lot of work on what they call cyber informed engineering. And I think this is fair because really the push of these movements are really to kind of put more responsibility on the OEMs and the technology vendors to kind of embed more security in their solutions. I've always thought that it was a bit unfair in the solar industry that it's really, you have these large owner and operators, which are really like construction companies and finance companies, like they're
Yes.
on the hook for defending our entire like national security. So I do think that these new movements that are coming help other people that have more technology capabilities kind of share the responsibility. So
Yeah,
anyway, it's a
that's
good thing too.
super important. Well, one last question for you. So if folks are listening and they're falling in that 20 megawatt to 75 megawatt, haven't thought about cybersecurity, what's the timeline here? Like, in my mind, I think it's, you need to start working on a solution now. Is that where you're seeing things?
Yeah, I think, I mean, again, and you probably know the timeline better than I do, frankly, but I think it is definitely time to start talking about it because, I think people felt the pain in the solar industry. A lot of people had cellular connections. I mean, this is smaller solar stuff
Yeah.
where they had these like 3G modems that would sunset, and then all of a sudden they would
Yes.
get these notifications that like all of your fleet is going to stop communicating in like a year from now.
Mhm.
So I think the industry has learned to start planning for this stuff early when it's talking about upgrading all your facilities or across your whole fleet kind of thing. So now is absolutely the time to start thinking about and planning for what you would deploy in the field. That would give you enough time to kind of just make it part of your regular scheduled maintenance or upgrades. So it probably has the least amount of cost impact for most customers.
Definitely. I think that 3G is funny. That's like circa 2017, 2018, and I'm pretty sure I had like 42 modems to replace in like a 3 month period.
Yeah. Yeah, that was very painful. So I think a lot of people learn. I use that example sometimes
Yeah.
for this conversation. It's like just start planning now. You have time. Like regulations don't move extremely fast, but you definitely want to plan. And also, like the way our world works is that if you have new sites coming online, those you want to make sure that they're already ready and they're already going to be fall within the compliance because you don't want to have to go back 2 years from now and kind of rip and replace the infrastructure that's in there. You might as well just design it in now. So we're having a lot of those conversations with folks at the moment.
That's awesome. Well, Keith, thank you so much for being here. I just really appreciate you making cybersecurity easy to understand, and I appreciate that you guys are finding solutions that are not utility level for all of us solar people.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
It's awesome talking to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Cool. Thanks, Kelly.